Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to look at some of the basic debugging features within the Xcode IDE and how to use them in your own projects. So let's get started. I'm using the Xcode 9 beta, Xcode 9 beta 6 I believe, but everything that we're doing here you'll be able to use in the official release, which should be in the next little bit. So I created a demo project, so I'm going to go ahead and open up Xcode 9 beta here and select the project that I made. This is just a simple project with not much UI. If we look at the main storyboard here, it's created a couple UI elements that we're going to use in the tutorial. So a view and a button, and then down here is just a view, some embedded views, so we can see how those can be accessed within the debugger. And so if I just was to run this as is, it'll open up the iPhone 6s simulator, and then it will just should open up our project as is without error or incident, which it does. And so here I have my button, and then you can see the other views that I created. So not really all that exciting, but we'll get into some of the cool stuff right now. So if I look at the code for this project is also very simple. I have just made some mock functions here that I'm going to call later, and then a lot of debug print statements, so that we can look at the output window here. But so one of the basic things that you can do within the Xcode 9 debugger is set breakpoints. Now breakpoints they'll stop your code, break your code at certain spots that you specify. All you have to do to set a breakpoint is actually click on the line number where you want to set it. And so here, in my code, if I want to stop at the very beginning of the loading of this view, I can put a breakpoint by clicking on line number 16, and then my code will stop right here. Then again, so this code, I'm going to call this method that actually hides the blue view. And so if I wanted to set another breakpoint within that method, I could do so as well. And so now running this program, we'll see that on our simulator, we don't get our UI coming up, and it immediately switches us back over to this blue view, over to the view controller code. So then what we can do is we have a couple options. And so if we look down here at this debug toolbar, we have a bunch of buttons here. And then I'll explain a few of these buttons now. So this first button that looks kind of like a play button is you can actually select this button and it will run your code or keep running your code. And so since we have this other breakpoint here, what will happen is it will start to run and then it will execute any functions. But since we have another breakpoint within this functions, we're going to stop here. So if we click this button, it'll stop there. Now, the next button is going to basically step you over each line that you have. So if I click this button, it's going to take me over this instruction where I'm setting the alpha to 0, and then it'll take me to the next line. And then if I press this button again, I then will be able to run the rest of the code, and then my views will come on screen. Now, if I was to rerun this, stop it here, and then rerun it, and get us back to where our code breaks, and I want to, and then delete this breakpoint. So I don't want to stop here, and then I can step through this function line by line. So I can select this button here, and it'll bring me to the next line. Now, if I select this button again on this line, it will bring me right over. But in the event that I don't want to go right over it, I want to go into it, I have two options. I could set another breakpoint, or I can use this next button here, which is going to step me into this function. Okay. And then now I'm in this function, and I could step through and through and then keep, it'll come back here and keep running. And then if I want to, run the rest of it, I can. All right. Another cool thing that we can get from the debugger is we can actually look at our view hierarchy in a very kind of unique visual way. And so this is our running project. Not doing much right now, but if we go back into Xcode, and down here on our debugging toolbar is this item to the right of the step options, and it looks, this looks kind of like a couple rectangles kind of stacked next to each other. And then if you hover over it, it says you can debug the view hierarchy. So if we select that, it'll bring up this window, and then if you're just looking at it when it first opens, it just looks like the same view that you have in the storyboard. But what you can actually do is, like, if you click and hold, you can actually start to rotate this view. Okay, and then you can start to see a little bit how your views are stacked on top of each other. So for example, here we have this kind of gray background, which is from our button, but then it separates out the text layer from that, and it blows out a little bit. And so you can kind of play around with that and see how those are put together. And then a couple of the controls here down here on the left is going to let you basically blow out the space between the views. So if I slide this all the way to the right, we get an even better idea of how these views are laid out, and then we can look at it however we want, and just kind of see how things are laid out. We can go as far that way as we want, or we can collapse it like so. Then over here on the right hand side is we can contract or expand how much we actually want to see, and then so in the far, bring it to the far left, we start to see more and more views, and so on and so forth. And so those are some of the things that you can play with. And then the other things that you find useful is, so like right now when you kind of are looking at this, you can see like we have the outlines, and then down here you can actually specify what you want to see, whether you can select that whether you want to see the wireframe outline and the contents, or if you just want to see the wireframe, of what the general outline is. And also you can just select to see the actual contents, which is more like what you would see on the screen. So this is useful if, for example, you're trying to debug where certain views ended up, specifically if you're adding views programmatically, to the main view. And so, like, for example, here I actually put these views behind this front view for the purposes of this demonstration. So you can see that I actually placed those behind. And so maybe, in a real world example, you may have done that programmatically, but not have meant to. But here, then you can see where your views actually ended up, I find that to be pretty cool. Then if I so right now the code is basically stopped from running, and so if we just hit the continue button, we'll go back to normal, and we can use our UI again. But that's pretty cool. Then the last thing, I don't really have a map view, or not using any location services or anything like that. But the last option here that we'll talk about is there's this little location style arrow, and you can actually simulate right here in the debugger. You could simulate these different locations. If you were testing out a location-based application, you could test these range of locations, and it would update your location data accordingly. But we're not doing any of that. So it's there just to make you aware, but we're not gonna go into that. So The next thing I want to show you is the idea of a call stack. Now, a call stack, is basically the order in which functions are being called in your application. And so to demonstrate that, what I want to do is I want to uncomment this line, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a breakpoint in each of these functions. Okay, and then I'm going to put one here too. I'm going to run this application again. What we're going to see is actually pretty useful from a debugging standpoint, especially when you get into larger applications and trying to figure out how you got to certain functions and the order that certain functions were running, etc. So if I run to each breakpoint, we're going to run through here. I'm just going to keep running. And again, and then I'm going to get into my fourth function. So we've gone, called this one first, called this one next, this one, and so forth. So that's all fine. This is all trivial, but did it for this purpose. So if we look over here in our debug navigator, we actually see the order in which we've loaded this application, and it's these lines here will show you the kind of the reverse order that you were in. So we started here down in view did load, and if we click there, it will bring us back, to that function how we got here. So then we called this first, we called this function I was called first, which was here, and then we called second, which is here, third, which is here, and fourth is the final spot that we got. So this is it's very useful, like I said, if you're working with larger projects and figuring out how you got certain places and things of that nature, which is kind of cool. So we'll stop that. So then the other things that I wanted to show was I didn't learn this until much later into my iOS and Swift programming, adventure, so to speak. So I'm going to take off. I'm going to delete some of these breakpoints, except I'm going to leave the one and I was called first. And we'll just go over a couple things here. All right, and so in this I was called first, I'm just going to add a variable here, constant rather. I'm going to call it print me string, and then we're going to call this this is the contents of print me. Okay, I'm not going to do anything with that other than declare it there, and this is just going to warn me that I'm not using it, but I really am here in a minute. And so I'm going to run this application again, and it's going to run to this first breakpoint like we would expect. And we didn't really do anything with this print me string, but we can see a couple things. One here on the left hand side is it's going to show basically this is like an auto window of all the variables that we're in scope with, where I can switch this to local as well. We'll leave it at auto, but here we can see that my print me string is listed here, and then it lists the value, which is great. Now, alternatively, if I want to get any information from the context that I'm in, I can come over here and I can use this command called PO, and I've heard PO used both as print object and also print out. Either works, but so what we can do here is we can say print out, and the autocomplete will help you out. And so print out print me string, and then if I let the autocomplete and then press enter, it'll take a minute to think or a second to think, and then we'll print out the contents of that variable, which is great. So we can use that for primitive types like string or int or doubles, and super helpful. And we can do that with complex objects as well. But that's just another good debugging technique. And then obviously the kind of the thing that didn't explain at the top of this lesson was our debug print lines. And so as we step over these, we can see that they get put into this output window as well. And they're all, obviously a good debugging technique as well to see what's going on in our application, and you'll use those a lot. And another cool thing about this output window here is I can filter it. So if I only wanted things that had the word line in it, and I can just type in it, and it will filter out those things that don't have the word line in it. And I can do one, and anything what have you, and print. And so that's also super helpful, because sometimes this this window, so like if we restart this application, you'll see that this window can get kind of cluttered with a lot of the built-in Apple related debug data, and then we add our own stuff in. This can get kind of this window can get kind of cluttered, and so what a lot of people do is they actually will put a tag into their debug statements, for example. And then so if we run this, and I want to ignore all of the built-in kind of garbage that isn't really helping anybody, or not helping me figure out my issues, I can just say, hey, filter out everything that does filter, or it's basically include anything that has DCS, my initials, in it, and then that will just give me my my lines, which is also super helpful. And so that's just another good way to help use the environment to debug your application. And so one of the other things I wanted to show was a common error that you're going to see, especially if you're just starting out developing in Xcode. But I have this method that I wrote called demonstrate nil when unwrapping an optional, and down here what you'll see in the method is I declared this optional variable, and then I attempted to unwrap this variable unsafely, because there's no guarantee that I have a value there, and I obviously don't, because I didn't provide one. And so when I run this, I'm going to start, and then I'm going to get this get this kind of ugly looking error, this bad instruction error. And so on its own that doesn't really help me, because if I hover over it, it says it's nil, which is would indicate to me that that's a problem, obviously, but to the maybe to a beginner or newcomer might be a little harder to figure out. And the reason I wanted to show this was over here again, we have all of our errors here, or not errors here, excuse me, all of our debug output here, and then we in the midst of this, we have our error, our actual error message. And so during the running of an actual application, you're going to have lots of this. And so sometimes what you'll have to do is you really have to look into this window. I mean, luckily for us, it's right here, but sometimes it's going to be not easy to find in this window. So you really have to look. And what I would and typically what would happen is if we stop this application, and then you just ran it right off the simulator, it's just going to do this. It's just you're going to open it, and it's going to close for no reason. So then we would want to take the steps of say, hey, all right, I'm going I'm going to come into my application here. I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I'm going to say run. And this is where the sometimes the stepping through and the stepping over of your application come in handy. And so I'm going to step over this. Stepped over my setup blue view. That was great. That worked just fine. And so I know that the problem's not there. And then I'm going to try to step over this, and then it's going to blow up on me and say, "Hey, you have this bad instruction, which happens to be this unhealthy or unsafe unwrapping of this optional value." And then I look, then I can look over here and say, "Oh, hey, fatal error, unexpectedly found nil while unwrapping an optional value." And then we can kind of, go through and then just for argument's sake, the right way to do this would be, we could say if let, parse double new price equals double price, then do something here, else we could set a, we could set, set a default value here if we wanted, rather than this. This isn't going to do anything, but other than to show that we won't crash anymore. So then if we, actually I don't need that breakpoint. So if we run this again, and then I'm just going to run to that line. We see it. We don't crash anymore. In normal circumstances we would do something useful here, but we can just run our application and we don't crash, which is what we're going for. So that's just another trick and tip of way to manage the debugging of your own code. The last thing that I wanted to show you was a common thing that I see and I run into from time to time, and some of the common questions that you see like on Stack Overflow and just the other sources are. So I have this button that I would want to do something, because it says press me. So obviously the idea is to press it and then some action would happen. And so what I did in the beginning here is in my view controller code, I made an IBOutlet for this button, but I named it, button press me and then underscore press, because what I had intended was for it to be an action, an IB action, not an IB outlet. I don't need to interact with it as an outlet. And so what I'm really needing to do is I need to create an IB action for it. And so, we type IB action func, and then we're going to say, button pressed, and then we'll just, and then in that button, I wrote this other small function that I'm going to animate in that blue view when it's pressed. And so I'll go over to my storyboard and just do a little work here and get that hooked up here. So button press, just drag it over here, touch up inside to respond to that event. Okay, and so now I'm gonna come over here, back to my view controller. I'm gonna actually delete my breakpoints because I don't need those for what I want to show now. And then, so I don't need to demonstrate that anymore either. So I'm just gonna set up my blue view and then let that load up. Okay, and so unless I made a mistake, what should happen is that when I press this button, my view should animate in, which it does, which is great. So that's fine in and of itself. But what will happen is if you're a good programmer and you're just neat and tidy, you're gonna say, hey, I don't need this outlet anymore. And so you're probably going to have a tendency to just come in here, clean this up, and delete it. And you're going to save this file, and you're going to just kind of go about your business. And then you're going to, at some point, you're going to make some other changes, and you're going to say, hey, I'm just going to test my code here. I'm going to, run this. And then you're going to get this crash. But you're probably saying to yourself, well, I didn't change anything. I just deleted, I deleted a line of code, and I was never referencing that IBOutlet anywhere. Unfortunately, Xcode doesn't care that you weren't using that variable anywhere, or you weren't accessing that view. So as I said before, like sometimes looking at this debug window was a little daunting, right? Because if I, kind of quickly scroll through this, I can't really ascertain where my error was just like easily looking at it. And if I run this again, where the Xcode environment brings me, it brings me into the app delegate with this thread 1 signal sig abort error, which a lot of new programmers, when they say, hey, I have an error in my application, they're like, oh, it's in my app delegate, line 12, and that's rarely the case. And it usually originates from somewhere else, and so it takes a little bit of work, but really you can, if you scroll up in this view, or in this output view, a lot of this stuff isn't helpful, and then you slowly work your way up to the top here, and we finally get to some more readable text, and we see this set value for undefined key error, and it says this class is not key value coding compliant for the key button pressed. And so this was the name. This was the original name of my IBOutlet, which I deleted. And so that clues me in on what I need to do. And so if I stop this and stop this project, and then I go over to my main storyboard, and I select this, and if I right click on the view controller, it'll bring up all of my outlets and actions, and so I can see that I have this outlet reference, this button press me _ pressed, and over here it's this line is indicating that it's still hooked up in some way, but the variable I got rid of, and you can see that has this little yellow it's like a warning traffic symbol, that's just to say, hey, there's a problem. And so at this point, I know I don't need it, so all I got to do is I got to remove it, like so. And then if I close this and then I start this again, all is good in the world, and I can press my button, and everything is good. But at any rate, those are some of the the tips and tricks that I've kind of picked up along the way here, for starting out to use the Xcode environment in Swift and iOS, and I hope that you found them helpful. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned on my channel for more videos.